To discuss this further, we're joined by Kelly Sloan, energy policy consultant and columnist, and Grant Newsham, retired U.S. Marine Colonel and former U.S. diplomat. He's also senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Okay, thank you both for joining us today. So the U.S. has opened a preferential trade zone for these minerals. What are your initial reactions to this initiative? Grant, we'll start with you.
Well, it's about time. One thing to consider here is just the effect that China using their chokehold on critical minerals, rare earths, has had on us. When President Trump took office, he went all out, going after the Chinese. Remember, it was about a 140% tariff he put on them. He was going to hit them for fentanyl. And then suddenly, for the first time, they played the rare earth card. And that stopped Mr. Trump in his tracks, forced him to back off. That's how serious this is. So it's, as I said, it's about time, and I'm glad to see it.
So Kelly, Grant says it's about time. What are your reactions?
Well, I agree with Colonel Newsham. It's hard to overstate the importance of these minerals to not only our economy, to our national security, to our energy infrastructure. And I believe this is the right way to do that, to work with our allies and form these trade blocs to be able to secure those the supply chains and try and wrest some of that control away from China. China right now has as the Colonel said, has a lock on particularly the refining of these minerals. About 86% of the market is owned by China right now for most of these minerals. That's up from 82% in 2020. Now, will this draw that back a whole lot? Probably not, but at least it gives us some options. Not let us be quite as dependent on the whims of communist China, who have shown themselves to be not reluctant at all to use their chokehold on this industry as a weapon.
And Colonel, can I just ask you, what do we know so far about this preferential trade zone, and how will it actually help the countries who join?
Well, it's the early stages, of course, and you have to see how it plays out. But there is a real interest in it, as you can see by the number of participants and the fact that the Vice President and the Secretary of State were there to kick it off, and the President obviously understands this. What it does is it prevents that potentially, if it goes to fruition, it prevents the Chinese from using this pricing power, really their dominance of the critical minerals, particularly rare earth end of it, as a weapon, really to bring their enemies into line, and if necessary, to destroy their industries and have that kind of threat over them. So if you get into the new consortium that is being talked about, well, you in theory, you make it almost impossible or very hard for the Chinese to extort you. And anytime you can get away from really potentially fatal blackmail, well, that's a good thing. Obviously, guaranteeing prices, guaranteeing demand, easing up on permits, and which should make it easier to have processing facilities somewhere besides China. These are all good things, and they're all actually commonsensical. I think any businessman could tell you, well, yeah, these are the things you have to do. And it is almost impossible to compete. In fact, it is impossible to compete with a regime like the PRC that doesn't play by any normal economic or investment rules.
Right. So speaking of which, Kelly, officials did not actually mention China by name, but much was said about the threat made by the Chinese regime to limit the world supply of critical minerals last year. So can you just remind us, for our viewers, everyone watching here, what is at stake when supplies are restricted and the impact of that?
Well, I think you saw it in the report just previous year, what happened when China put in export controls over even just a few of these minerals, what it did to our auto industry. Now, you think of what these minerals are used for, and it's not just energy, but in terms of batteries, as we try and electrify our economy, and as AI, as it becomes a growing industry, is going to use up a lot of electricity, and we're looking at ways to increase our storage with battery technology and whatnot. All of that requires critical minerals and rare earths. The national security implications that these minerals are components of some of the most high-end chips that were used in just about anything from personal vehicles to jet fighters to missile systems. They're found in just about anything. And if you have one government, especially an adversarial government like Communist China, that has a chokehold over supply and therefore the pricing, like the Colonel said, you can see how that can be used as a weapon. Right now, perhaps it's an economic one. Later on, if for instance, China does make good on its threat to make a move on Taiwan and decides to cut off Western supply of those critical minerals, our ability to ramp up our defense and our defense industry will be severely hampered. Not to mention the impacts it's going to have on the domestic side of the economy as well. So, like I said before, it's difficult to understate the importance of these minerals. And I, as a bit of a free market purist myself, I do think that this is one of those unique instances where the stakes are so high for not just our national security, but for the security of the entire West, that it requires some government intervention. This is a good way to do it, working with our allies, forming trade blocs, securing that those supply chains. I think it's a far better approach, quite frankly, than what he was doing with some of the rare minerals by trying to buy into U.S. companies and have the government own stakes in U.S. companies. Doing it this way is, I think, going to have be a lot more sustainable going forward, have a better economic result for us. If you couple that with the bill that the Congress is contemplating right now to allow some of the streamlining of the permitting so we can mine more of our own, I think the administration in this case is going certainly in the right direction.
Right. So, Colonel, Kelly brought up that these minerals go into some of the everyday items that we use. Can you just add to what Kelly said, the stakes here, and how does this, how important is this to the U.S. military as well?
Well, you use it in just about everything, from smartphones to medical equipment to F-35s to chips that are in everything. Unless you want to go back to making things maybe out of wood and iron, you'd better pay attention to what's going on here and how does it affect the military. If you want cruise missiles for attack or missile defense systems, F-35s, you want certain types of radars, you want night vision devices, you want drones. All of these depend on rare earths and also the other less rare but equally critical minerals. You cannot have a modern military without access to these. And it really tells you something that we have gotten ourselves into this fix over 30 years. And if you could name one admiral, one general who was raising merry hell about getting this dependent on the Chinese, I'd like to know his name. So President Trump is dealing with a problem that has festered for decades, and now he's the one who's supposed to fix it. It's to their credit that within a year they are going after this as aggressively as they are. But you really cannot overstate the importance of these materials, minerals, from a defense perspective alone.
Okay, Kelly, I'm wondering here if there's a role for the private sector as well to reduce reliance on China. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. And again, if Congress does pass the bill to allow some streamlining of the permitting for domestic mining, certainly we have a lot of these minerals domestically at our disposal. A lot of them are located on federal lands, which creates some problems when we have such a strict and cumbersome permitting process and environmental reviews. One of the reasons that China is so dominant in this industry is because they don't have the restraints we do. Under their centrally planned economy, all that matters is the result that some bureaucrat wrote down 5 years ago. Whether they're polluting their waters or causing other issues, that doesn't really matter to them. We go too far the other way, where we've made it almost impossible to responsibly use our own resources that we have under our feet here. So I think unleashing the power of the free market within our country will go a long ways to stripping us of some of that dependence on China. And we can't do it all on our own. We do have to rely on allies. We have there's more of these minerals in Canada and Australia and some other places. So working with our allies and forming a trade bloc like this, again, I think is a wonderful idea, and the Trump administration deserves a lot of credit for going down this route.
Okay, Colonel, what do you think about what Kelly said? I'll give you the final word here.
Well, he's absolutely right. One thing I would add is that it is going to take the government to sort of take the wood to the Chinese, because anytime that they have the ability to undercut by pricing, somebody who tries to set up as competition and drive them out of business, they're going to do it. And that cannot be allowed to continue. You have to have the same rules. You have got to go after that and make it so they cannot undercut, either by pricing or even in direct investment into, say, a startup in a free nation, including the United States. So they are going to have to sort of not just block and unleash the U.S. private sector, which will, once they have can play by the same rules as everyone else, we will win. But you have got to take on the Chinese. They've been allowed to cheat, and people act like this is normal. It's not. It's not a normal society, not a normal economy, and we've got to actually recognize that, and the government has to do that. Unfortunately, China has bought off any number of lobbyists and politicians, but as Peter Schweitzer writes about all the time. But that said, we know what the problem is, and once American factories start closing because of the Chinese cutting off rare earths, well, then all sides of the political spectrum will take an interest.
Right, Colonel, you're absolutely right that it's way past time that we take on the Chinese. Thank you both for speaking with us today. Kelly, Colonel Newsham.
Thank you.